Good evening. How are we? Um, Zarina, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with share with us your firsthand experience here. Um, from being on the ground in Kherson for the better part of the last 2 years, living in this environment, being a part of it almost every day. Could you, for us, give us kind of an update first on the situation within the last week? We talked about this on stream last week, so we have kind of an idea of what happened for the most part of September, but if you could kind of give us an update on the situation as it stands right now.
Yes, first of all, thanks for having me. Thank you to the audience for paying attention. This is a very serious matter. I unfortunately, being here on the ground, didn't have time to listen to your previous report, but I've read your articles and I know they're very, very good and data-based. One thing that I would like to note right away that overall, this situation with drone attacks is not just happening in the Kherson region. It's happening everywhere along the border, as I know you know, and it's developing, it's evolving. And reading a report and being on the ground, obviously, two very, very different things. From day to day, you might not be able to grasp the change physically. And so the people of Kherson are sort of being in this situation of a frog being boiled alive. They sometimes don't even realize how normal it is to be hunted by a drone anymore. They also believe that the world knows about it, and this is not true. I know that your audience here, for one, is aware, but this is very, very rare. And so there is this big gap when the remaining population of Kherson believes that everybody knows what's happening. So what's happening? You can't walk down the street freely like you would anywhere else. And I've been working in Ukraine for the last 2 years and a half, and a lot of this time was spent in Kherson, but also in other frontline cities and villages. And despite artillery fire, you're still able to walk down the street. Currently in Kherson, you have to do short bursts from one tree to another. You have to hide, you have to listen to the buzzing, and there's a lot of buzzing because there are bees, there are flies, there are motorcycles still, and believe it or not, they're still lawn mourners because Ukrainians are very much into their gardens, lawns, and parks. So occasionally you think it's a drone, but no, it's a lawn mourner. So what I have been doing, I have been using what's called an Arrakis. Here is this device. And you might have heard of these analyzers. There's a different type called Tsukarok. This is the new model, and it gives me on the little screen the readings. Like right now, I just turned it on, and it's very unusual because I see only one drone flying in on very low frequencies, like 975, 995. Previously today, for the most of the day, you would see 5 to 8 to 10 drones, FPV drones, most of them flying on very high frequencies, like almost up to 3,000. And this device gives me a reading. So I know when it's 1 minute away or 0 minute away, it will buzz terribly, making a really scary sound, like say if I'm writing an article. And if they are still, right now, it's doing it right now. 0. So that means that very close by, flying at a frequency 2,456, there is a drone. And most of the time, there are many of them. So I took it with me on the walks because, I work. So I go and report, film, do interviews. And the last 2 days, I've been walking around with this device. And pretty much 99.9% of the time, I see 5 of such drones. Not that I can do much. I would know to hide and watch. That's what everybody's doing. You just hide under the tree and try to listen and decide whether you are about to throw yourself on the ground and curl or not.
Wow, thank you, and very interesting for you to share the drone detector device. We've seen, like, being involved on the Telegram side of things, we've actually seen quite a lot of those in terms of photos of them posted by the enemy. Um,
Yeah.
and they claim, I'm sure, as you're familiar as well, they sort of claim those as EW sometimes and as a license to then strike. Um,
This is not correct. Like, I have one right here, and it doesn't act as such. And I have to say that, unfortunately, fortunately, or as we are well aware, relying on any information on the Russian Telegram channel has to be done with 100%, grain of salt. Because even if they claim something somewhat seemingly innocently, it could be the maneuver to trick you into thinking something. I happen to be an expert in disinformation before the big war, before 2022. For 10 years, I've been dealing with the Kremlin disinformation and propaganda techniques and such. And so I see a lot of it on Telegram channels. And we'll talk about this a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. And so just a little bit more about the current situation. What could you tell us about what has gone on today and in the last couple of days in terms of strikes on civilians? And then I know this morning you had made some posts about remote mining. Could you talk a little bit about some of that that's kind of been more recent developments?
Yeah, I believe that was yesterday, but it could have been today. It could have been every day. First of all, what has happened today? Pretty much the same thing as every day. Say yesterday, I was interviewing women in a yoga studio about their experiences with drones on the way to work, on the way to yoga, when I received a phone call from one of my contacts who asked me to hop in a taxi, which sounds easy, not so easy because, of course, taxis are number one targets, and any cars moving around are number one targets for the Russian drones. So sometimes in some places you just can't get a taxi and you sort of have to run. But I was lucky enough to get a taxi. So I went to the marketplace where actually it turned out that the drone didn't strike, but they have found an unexploded object, which I will be able to tell you later. I received the whole very long description of the nature of that shell, which didn't detonate. So the police was called, and luckily the police was able to make it. And the sappers unit was able to make it, because it's not always the reality. The usual maintenance service, communal services, are just not functioning properly. Most of the times they can't be there, such as firemen for one, or sappers, because there is either a threat of a double tap, when for those who do not know in the audience, there could be either artillery strike or another group of drones striking at first responders, and it's a signature move and signature tactic of the Russian military. Or sometimes there's simply just not enough people because already a lot of first responders were killed. And those who survived, many just quit and don't want to work close to the coastal area. Close to the coastal area, almost nothing is working. Taxis are not going there anymore. So that was today. Yeah, today I got a ride from a taxi driver who was wearing a bulletproof vest. Not everybody is that affluent or that lucky. Not everybody has a vest. So that was yesterday, and then I visited a hospital where I was talking to 4 people from Antoniivka and Kindika and Vostochny, injured by the drones. At the time as I was talking to them, there were 4 more people delivered to the hospital who were just injured by more drones. And this is very typical. And of course, these people are terrified to go back home because nothing will be changing for the better back in Kindika or Antoniivka. These are the suburbs. It's actually a question. They were right before the war, they became technically a part of Kherson, but many still refer to them as suburbs. But they typically don't have money to move. They don't have jobs, and here they have at least their houses and kitchen gardens. They do garden a lot, and they do grow a lot of vegetables and fruit. The soil here is very rich. So yeah, they don't want to leave, but they are terrified. And then this morning I had to go for another interview, and a colleague of mine, a local journalist, and I had to hide in the park. On the way through the park, we discovered a fire, which is another issue here because the drones very often drop napalm-like incendiary mixtures in cans or in bottles, and they explode or just ignite and start the fire. And there's a lot of dry leaves, and there are a lot of dry grass. And right now on your screen, you see last Sunday, I believe, filming from the report closer to the river. And we are hiding behind the tree because there's a drone there, and it's attempting to do a double strike. And it actually then achieves to do so. And it drops the load, first a smaller one and then a bigger one. And then the maintenance workers are saying, yeah, this is it, we're leaving. And then the firemen arrive because behind us, behind this bush, is a big fire and the house is being burned. But getting back to the mining question, yes, so that's yet another tactic of destruction of the scorched earth, if you will, that the Russians are currently using and developing and improving. They are dropping a bunch of PMF-1 banned anti-infantry mines, and they are small, and they are called Lipitsky or Perlusky in Russian and Ukrainian, and it means petals, and they look like leaves, like tree leaves. But if that wasn't enough, the Russians decide that they need to disguise them looking more like stones or looking more like trash, garbage. It could be anything that doesn't look as a mine. As a result, a lot of people are stepping on them or picking them up to clean, because Ukrainians love their streets and their gardens clean, and they clean all the time. And the Russians know it, and this is particularly low trick. And yesterday in the hospital, one of the injured men I interviewed was telling me about his neighbor who picked up such an object cleaning in her yard and got heavily injured by that.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. The PFM ones. Yeah. I think it's crucial to underline that the use of those in almost any case constitutes a war crime. And I think that's a really basic fact that maybe Western audiences aren't familiar with, aside from the more sinister things that are going on here. So to follow up a little bit more on sort of um, people being afraid to go outside, people being afraid to return to their homes after they've been injured. I think something that can be lost on Western audiences sometimes, and our audience is typically mostly from the US, but we do draw like a very large international audience. Um, I think it's like 50-50 almost in terms of European and US audience. So in terms of these citizens and after they've been attacked or those that are living under constant daily attack, you said you compared it to like a frog boiling in water. Um, I know a lot of Westerners sometimes have the attitude of, well, why wouldn't you just leave? And obviously, we as analysts have paid attention to this, and we can see why that question might not necessarily be the right question to ask. But could you talk about the complicating factors that these people live under daily? Sort of like why has the or how has the water become boiled, and what is it like for civilians who are many of them are vulnerable civilians as it is, skewing more to the elderly in those neighborhoods.
Right. Thank you. Great question. And I appreciate you translating it into the Western experience because I lived in the States, in California, most of my life. And I understand how foreign this reality is to, say, my neighbors or my friends and relatives. And before we jump into that, I want to comment on the video where you see people with a hose trying to put down the fire. And that they are lucky to have that water in that hose because most of the time, actually, the Russians would hit the diesel generator and break it. And there's no running water because that already has been taken down by artillery strikes. So there will have to be the pumps to pump the water from water wells. And if the diesel generators are down, the water wouldn't be running. So these people were very lucky because they had the water in the hose, and then the fire engine, as you could see, actually made it there, which is very, very unusual at this point. So eventually the fire was put down. And that is just a part of what people have to deal with. So let's look into essentials. I often get a question, are people starving there? How is the food situation? That is not an issue whatsoever. In fact, the local supermarket, the equivalent of American Whole Foods here, is something out of a fairy tale. Like my Californian neighborhood Whole Foods pales compared to the store here. The deli is just to die for, pun intended. The food is really delicious. Everything is beautiful, and most people have enough food to eat. Of course, money is an issue. Prices have gone up lately, but there are other stores that are not as extravagant, but they offer the variety of affordable food. So nobody is starving here. The volunteers at this moment almost completely stopped functioning. There are several organizations here and they're still distributing food. There's even an American group here, but they can't, for obvious reasons, drive to Antonievka, Kindika, or these coastal areas, or forget about Sadova, which is further along the coastline. But people make it to the offices and pick up some free food. Then electricity and gas, there are still some areas around along the coast that didn't have electricity, gas, water, running water for 2.5 years, ever since liberation. Before the liberation, Russian broke all of these services. And the internet is very, very patchy. There are some spots and where people can catch signal to connect to their relatives. And as they do so, they get injured, as I found out yesterday in the hospital. And most people in the coastal areas lost their cars, if they had private cars. And there's public transportation, which traditionally is good. It might not be luxurious, but it comes regularly. It's very affordable. But at the moment, pretty much every marshrutka, as they're called, like minibus or a big bus or trolley bus, which are still running here, has been hit by a drone or sometimes artillery, because nobody cancels artillery or tanks or mortar. You have to understand that it's still going on. Like several times a day, we have artillery strikes, but people hardly pay attention to it anymore. Although every day, several people get injured or killed by artillery or MLRS or sometimes tank. So what else from a daily life? Obviously, the schools, kindergartens, offices are not working. There's an issue with a fairly crazy idea of building, under these circumstances, an underground school, which didn't make the locals very happy, because for one thing, there are some children left in the safer areas, or the areas that used to be safer inland, but they haven't been going to school ever since COVID, because first there was COVID, and then immediately the invasion started and there was occupation, and very few people sent their kids to Russian schools. And those who did, some had their children abducted. And then the Russians started to pummel the place with whatever weapons they had at their disposal. So the children never got to go to school. They are online schools, and their underground construction site is not a very brilliant idea. Let's just put it this way.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I think that's also an interesting point that you bring up there. Something that I notice all the time as the daily news mapper for Andrew's map is children being returned from occupied territories every now and again. You might see 5 or 6 children and maybe some of their family members being returned every month or something like that. And I think that situation isn't talked about enough as well. Not to distract from the drone situation, but another thing you also mentioned that I think it's interesting, and it's definitely worth talking about a little bit more, is the shelling situation and the airstrike situation. And to my knowledge and to my understanding, that's increased within the last few weeks or the last few months. Could you speak to a little bit about that?
I think when it comes to artillery strikes, I am a bit of a frog in the pot myself, because you just get so used to the sounds of artillery in the background, or even close sounds of artillery, that you just stop paying attention. It's ongoing. It just never stops. It's always there. In fact, when it stops and when it's not there, you feel very concerned, because you realize that they are about to start something horrible. So I cannot tell if it has increased. I don't know. I was focusing on drones so much. I can tell you that Mr. Tolokonnikov, who's the spokesperson for the Kherson Regional Military Administration, told me the other day in an interview just 2 days ago that for a while the guided aerial bombs were not being used on Kherson. I'm sorry, I just saw somebody's note here that my English is very good. Thank you very much. I'm an American journalist. I do have an accent, but I'm I'm an American writer. I have 5 books. So just I don't want to confuse you and think, I don't want you to think that I'm a Ukrainian citizen, resident, or a journalist. I am an American currently reporting from Ukraine. So I might not even know some of the things that are happening, but I hope that I do know the most of it, being here for so long. Just wanted to clarify it, as I know it is confusing. So for the aerial guided bombs, they have certainly increased, and it's a trend and a tendency. We're seeing it not just in Kherson, but also in the Kharkiv region, as you know, and in Sumy, of course, it's a big issue. And I left Kherson to go and report from Sumy quite recently, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that is also on the rise, not necessarily in Kherson itself, but very close to Kherson, particularly in Berislav. And if you are interested in the subject, I can recommend you a documentary by Deutsche Welle on the subject of drone attacks on civilians. It was done early in the year, so Berislav was one of the places mostly attacked, but it's a brilliant documentary, so I really recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've watched that documentary as well and used it as a resource in my earlier reporting, and it's very thorough. And you actually have noticed there are actually some units that are involved in that are also involved in this, the 205th Brigade specifically. Um, so one other thing I think that gets lost on people, with our reporting, right? We focus on data, we focus on casualties, but I think one thing that people aren't seeing necessarily is for example, like with I know Andrew has been tracking this for over a year now at this point, in Kherson Oblast generally, specifically Beryaslav early on, but now in Kherson itself, is the attacks on infrastructure, right? That don't necessarily make it onto the larger platforms or posts that go viral and stuff like that. The sort of like war on movement, as they've called it. So what could you say about sort of like those smaller attacks that don't necessarily that we don't necessarily cover, that we don't necessarily see? Could you offer any more insight into like infrastructure and civilian infrastructure that's disrupted? I know you had mentioned public transportation as one.
Right. Well, I mean, overall, I would like to emphasize the chaotic nature of these attacks. There's really no particular trend or no particular direction. This is what strikes me the most. And they are, as I'm taught by both military sources and local authorities, drone experts, and just regular residents, that there is a school, a pilot school, somewhere in Rostov-na-Don in Russia, and the graduates of the school are being sent to the occupied left bank territory of the Kherson region to train on the civilians and whatnot, not just civilians or necessarily even humans, on the right Ukrainian controlled bank of the river Dnipro. And I have been taught that according to the intercepted conversations, it is so. They're possibly having somewhat of an incentive system with bonuses. And of course, they're first and foremost are interested in military targets. And they would be running around, or let's say flying around, looking for something military, which is not that easy to find in the city of Kherson, because I've been here for 2 years on and living here for a year. You don't see tanks or even block posts in the city of Kherson. So needless to say, they come here, they don't find this goal, but they are carrying the load. and it is cost efficient not to go all the way back across the river and return to the remote pilot with the load. So they go as far as they can with the retransmitters allow them to go. And now I'm told that they can go as far as 30 kilometers inland. And I personally saw one doing a drop in a village 18 kilometers in from the river. And also for as long as their battery is allowing them to go. And then at some point they have to return. And at this point, they decide to drop it on just pretty much anything that moves. And there is another reason for that. We definitely talking about fear being weaponized. There's terror here in Kherson. They're terrorizing civilians, and we can talk about it separately. Why would they do it, and what are their goals? But that is a long story short. They're not necessarily targeting the infrastructure, but if they can find objects of infrastructure, they're happy to destroy them. For instance, there is an oncological center close to the Antonievsky Bridge, and it has been targeted day in, day out for a very long time, and previously by artillery strikes, and now by the drones pretty much daily, and they're closer to Aleshki, they're closer to the other side, so it's very easy for drones to do that. And there they've been trying to destroy the large industrial generator, which provides power to the whole facility. And we're talking about the oncological health center. That's where they still have up to 100 inpatients, plus ambulatory patients as well. And of course, the hospital would run surgeries, and this particular hospital runs chemos, and they need power for that. And the Russians are trying to destroy it. They do target other hospitals. For instance, getting access to interview or film in a hospital is practically impossible. That's why you don't get very many reports from here. And that's another issue why you don't get reports. We can discuss it as well. But occasionally they're lucky enough to find and hit gas pipeline or some power stations, but fortunately not that often.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for clarifying that it's more chaotic and more random, and getting into sort of like our discussion. Perhaps now is a good time to get into it. The terroristic nature of it, right? The dropping of bombs on whatever moves, and then we've noticed a lot, and I know I've looked at a lot of their Telegram posts to try and like analyze what they're saying and the falsehoods and sort of how they're trying to cover up their crimes. Um, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, Brendan, I wouldn't say that they are trying to cover this particular crime. They actually claim this crimes, and they are very proudly sharing the videos and the evidence of the crimes, as you know.
Yeah, the post from this morning, I think, was pretty evident of the wanton nature of their violence, of the gentleman that had been killed by them. They said three days ago.
But there are many. There are several. I actually collect these videos. There are up to 5 daily just from one Telegram channel, and there are many Telegram channels, and they rejoice and have, find some sadistic joy in sharing the videos of attacks on civilians. For instance, the other day I shared a video of a young woman, 23-year-old, and she's a mother of 2 very young children, toddlers, and she was biking from a cafe, her cafe that she runs in Kherson, and drone was following her, chasing her, and then eventually it dropped the grenade on her, and injured her very badly. So I was interviewing her in front of the hospital. It's the video is on my Twitter wall. You can watch it. And this is happening every day. And the reason it was remarkable because there was a video of this particular woman riding a bicycle, and the Telegram channel that that shared it, that means said, "Oh, look at this Ukrainian soldier riding on the bike. Now he's badly injured, and we will not let the first responders approach him." They believe it's a. Although, if you look closely at this video, you see that this is an individual with long hair, which is most likely a woman.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry if I didn't phrase that quite correctly, but I've seen that same thing in my experience as well in examining these Telegram videos. There was an attack on two elderly men on September 20th, and the mill blogger had claimed that they were soldiers, but you could very easily tell they were elderly men. They weren't necessarily able to walk freely. One of them had a significant limp before he was attacked, and they both were sort of hunched over and had gray hair. So yeah, I think it's important to your point, to make sure that we convey that to the audience, that it's not necessarily an attempt to cover as so much poor excuses, low effort excuses, and if not even excuses, celebrating the death of those people, or the maiming or the harming of those people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Today
Today
there was a particularly
go ahead.
There's a post that really angered me. Like they showed an image of a man who had passed away, and he was laying in the street, and they said, "He's been laying here for 3 days. Why haven't you got him yet?"
Yes, and I was talking to my friends. I know exactly where the location is, and nobody was able to approach it because they target pretty much anyone who would be there. I've seen, when I went to do the interview at the oncological hospital, I saw the abandoned vehicles that nobody could approach. We like rushed through them. That was like pretty much on the battlefield. And that was about 3 weeks ago. At this point, it's almost impossible to drive there for another interview, because it was like 99% I would be injured myself if I do that. And, you know, at this point, it's impossible for anyone outside, unlike this a taxi driver who's driving in his bulletproof vest inside the car, so the drone pilots can see him. But anybody who's operating outside, like the police or the firemen or the rescuers, or myself as a journalist, before for a year, I used to walk around in a bulletproof vest and a helmet because of the artillery strikes and tanks and mortar. But right now, this would be asking and inviting them to strike me. So you can't protect yourself.
Wow, that's so yeah. So they would use then your donning of that equipment, that protective equipment, as a license to strike. That's horrific.
Yeah. And today, speaking, you know, and I didn't quite catch, somebody else spoke before. Sorry, I didn't catch.
It was Andrew. It was Andrew.
Andrew, right? Andrew, sorry. Today I shared, and I believe you shared that video as well. There was a song, speaking of not hiding their intentions and not hiding their war crimes. And it's very hard at this point to shock me by anything that Russians do. You'd think you've seen it all, but this particular song, when I was translating it, I was quite shocked, because it says in plain Russian, very loud, repeating many, many times, I didn't count, but at least 10 times, "Let's kill Ukrainians, kill Ukrainians. We won't ever be tired of repeating, kill Ukrainians. Give me the remote to those nukes. If you're afraid of the responsibility, I will do it. I'm not afraid." So
yeah, I think that sums it up.
Yeah, and so they, we don't have to question it. They're saying it. They're giving it to us. They say we want to kill the Ukrainians, and we are killing them. And here comes a question that I see in the chat as well, like what can we do? And at some point, I know you have other questions too, but at some point it would be great to address it as a group, as a community, as the worldwide community, to see if there's anything that we can do to actually save the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think go I have one last question, sort of about sort of the details of maybe sort of the tactics that you've been noticing and some things that you've been seeing in the skies. And then I think that that'd be a really great place to drive this conversation into so what can we do about it? But my first question before we get there, it seems to me in some of the interviews that you had that, and like you had mentioned earlier when you were talking about your drone detector, that these drones are working in teams, right? It's easy when you're just seeing things through one drone video, through, maybe some people are only exposed to one or two Telegram channels, but there's several. There's maybe a dozen, I would say, related to this. Um, you get the impression, if you're just on that one, that it's one drone at a time, and it's maybe stalking. But I've seen described in interviews that it seems like there are almost waves and teams, kind of coming in the morning and doing their sort of their terrorist attacks as much as they can, and then filing back out. So have you noticed like team tactics or like waves or anything? Can you attest to any of that?
Yes, I mean, and again, as I understand, people come and go in this chat. There could be some people who just joined in and didn't have a chance to see this little device that I have here. And I'm not trying to advertise it. It sounds like I do. But it is called Arrakis, not Sugar Cube Sukarok. It's a different type. It's a little bit evolved, I understand. And it's showing me how many drones I have in vicinity. Currently, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with 4 of them flying at high frequencies and 1 at low frequency. And the closest one is 7 minutes away, which is for me a luxury. Usually I have at least 0 minutes away. I live in a sort of dangerous area. And for those who are just joining, my name is Zarina Zabrisky. I'm an American journalist reporting from Kherson. Answering your question further beyond this device, I spoke to many people who live in the coastal area in Dniprovsky region by the river, and also in Antonievka, whose windows are facing the river and who have the beauty of watching the flocks of drones flying towards them. Previously, early in the morning, I remember when the first time I interviewed this doctor and her son who live right next to the river. And that was the first time that they actually saw several of them, up to 10, I believe, flying away like cranes almost, towards downtown of Kherson. Then they heard the sounds of drops, and it's a very distant sound. We didn't speak about that, but you can tell it from very many different sounds that we have here in Kherson. Like artillery is like a thunderstorm somewhere far away or very, very close. Then sometimes if it's very close, you hear the whistling of a shell right next to it. And that's when you know you have to hide, because it's close. And, when it explodes, you hear a lot of glass, you hear the dogs barking, sometimes car alarms. It's different with the drones. I was struggling to describe the sound correctly. To me, it sounds like a bunch of wet boards being dropped from a truck. It's a very wet sound. It's kind of like very untidy sound. And usually the dogs start also, but not always the glass. It's a smaller sound as opposed to the artillery strike. So you hear them and you know that it struck. And so this doctor and her son heard the drones, Mavics and FPVs, dropping the loads and heading back to rush back empty. So, of course, not all of them make it back, because we know that there are FPV drones which are used as kamikaze. And for those who are not familiar, that means that they are dropping down and they explode on impact. These drones obviously do not come back, but that's okay for the Russians, because these drones are fairly cheap and they are funded, as I'm told, by the volunteers and not, again, according to what I was told, provided by the Russian military, because they do not fit into the specifications. And Mavics are more expensive, so they usually drop the explosives, or they're used only as the reconnaissance drones. And what I heard lately, the last week, I had a lot of reports of groups, as you asked, Brandon, and as you noted correctly, and there would be one Mavic and a couple of FPVs or more FPVs. And I understand that there would be the retransmitters on them, and that the FPV drones are feeding off them, and that's why they're able to fly so far. And they are also equipped with beta batteries. And so the group of them would work together. Occasionally and oftentimes, and I've seen myself alone drone, and that most likely would be a reconnaissance drone. And that means that soon after that, it will bring something else. And occasionally it can bring an artillery strike, because it's, again, a reconnaissance drone. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Describing, and I think for the audience, I think like a little vocabulary lesson is probably in order for them too, right? They have like a very specific name, those drone drop grenades that you had mentioned, right? Skids, I think is how it's referred to colloquially in Ukraine. They have sort of, and the explosives are sometimes improvised in nature, correct? Like I've seen reports of like Coca-Cola cans being used as sort of the container for the explosive device. So we're not talking about, and like you had mentioned, we're not talking about necessarily military standard equipment. It's a lot of improvised stuff in many cases.
In very many cases, I've seen a lot of them. I spoke to several sappers, and I've been shown what they have to neutralize, or something that didn't detonate, or the remainders of what has exploded. And you'd be surprised. You wouldn't think it's the Second Army of the world. You think it's just some gang of school children. There would be rusty nails, some darts, homemade, scrap. The young woman I was talking about before previously, according to her and several military I spoke to, the shrapnel that got into her neck and into her leg and into her stomach were made of some sort of alloy that had titanium in it. And because of that, the doctors couldn't use the magnetic appliances to get them out. And so she will have to live with them. They would be encapsulated in her bone. And I believe they were able to get it out of her neck. So there's all sort of material inside. The same goes for napalm-like mixture. They basically mixing it at home. It's something homemade. And the police press officer the other day told me that it's impossible for now to define exactly what type of mixture they use. Because, of course, at the time that the firemen arrive or the police arrive, it burned down. So it's a big question, what do they use? But it would be interesting to compare, because in the Sumy region, there were some finds in the forest where Russians do the same tactic. Echoside, right? They drop the jars with incendiary mixture, and some of them didn't explode, so they have the samples. It would be interesting to see what the research shows.
Yeah, I think that's up in like Snobnovorovsky, correct? Up in northern Sumy in that densely forested area. I know I've been looking at firms data for a while, and it's constantly on fire.
Yeah,
Um,
I spoke to the fireman there last time I was there. We went to the field visit, and I was filming there. I have an article about it in my state newspaper, and also in the Sunday Post about Echoside and the way they're burning the forest. I wouldn't be able to tell you the numbers from the top of my mind, but they're really scary numbers in terms of their percentage of the forestry burning in this area.
Yeah, I think also to highlight one thing you bring up, and I know you've covered this in the past as well, and this has been something that, I mean, living in Kherson, this is something you deal with is ecocide, right? Having lived now in Kherson a year or more past the destruction of the Novokakhovka Dam, and the stress that that puts on the environment in not just Kherson but across the entire region. That pattern of ecocide, that strategy of ecocide, I think that's really important to highlight as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, anything you would like to add on that? And then I would like to start to move maybe towards like some potential conclusions that we could talk about.
Right. Well, what we're dealing with here is scorched earth strategy. I think it's important to have like a bird's view and general analysis. It's not just a bunch of renegades or some, pilot school graduates who decided to randomly hunt humans. All of this is a part of strategy. That is coming from the very top, because Russia has a vertical structure of power. So, never hesitate. Do know that while it's all performed by the ordinary Russians, the orders are coming all the way up from the Kremlin and from the top military officials. And we see that in Mariupol, we saw that Avdiivka, we saw that in Volnovakha, whatever the towns and villages that were razed and are no more, like Chasiv Yaro, Bakhmut, right? This is scorched earth, and it's not just limited to Ukraine. We've seen that in Syria. They were attempted to do that during the Chechen war and during the conflict with Georgia. This is just the signature Russian move. They are destroying every resource that can be used by their opposing army, and they are also using the policy of fear, the weaponized fear. And what they are doing now in Kherson, in addition to destroying the infrastructure, to destroying the natural resources, destroying the buildings and the city of Kherson itself, they are terrorizing people, forcing them to move, even though they don't have funds for that. They don't have logistics necessary for whatever, comfortable or not comfortable, any move. And they are turning not just the coastal area, but the whole city of Kherson and its suburbs into a gray zone. And that's what Putin was talking about in August when he brought up making the sanitary zone around Kharkov. And then Ukraine took initiative and took the zone in the Sumy region all the way, pushing it into the Kursk Oblast, into Russia. So we are talking about the gray zone. The difference here is the front line is the river. This is very unusual because everywhere else there's a land and it's kind of vague. You don't know where the border or the front line is. Here it's very clear. I saw it today, and it's only 400 meters wide. On the other side, there are Russian positions. and they can do it very comfortably, very conveniently, with relatively small losses. The reason why Ukrainians are unable to hit them back right away is because there are Ukrainians living on the other side in the occupied areas. And pretty much every person I know here in Kherson has a relative or a loved one or a close someone on the other side. And the same goes for the military. And the Ukrainian military are not going to, carpet bomb Aleshki, which is the settlement on the other side. They cannot do it. And they have to do it looking for the pilots, they call it pilot nests, and eliminating them, precisely. And that is hard. And that takes us to the question, what can be done? I think we will need to talk about electronic warfare here, about jammers, and about some generally new approach or new thinking in the world of modern warfare. And that goes back to your department. I'm a war reporter. I'm a journalist. I'm not military. So you will have to advise me and the residents of Kherson what can be done to save them.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you first for that sort of summation there on Echoside and just sort of the broader terroristic policies of Russia. And what I'd like to bring up here, to give the viewers kind of that frontline view that we see here all the time, working with Andrew's map. Now, Andrew and I've been working with Andrew for the last 4 months as a daily news mapper, but Andrew has been mapping this war for the better part of it's almost a year anniversary, I think, with the news map, but I think maybe even longer in other capacities. So we like to try and keep a track of the volume of strikes, right? Every news story that comes through, we try and track it. Every casualty report that comes through that's in addition to a drone strike, we try and track that as well. And we had a discussion in the past. I talked about this with Andrew. I talked about it with the panel here. We tossed around some ideas and talked about some things with Jonathan Pierce from ATP Geopolitics, even about what can we do about this going forward. And we'd seen reports from Oleksandr Prokudin, the governor of Kherson Oblast. We'd seen that he had employed recently new EW systems. I don't know how much of an impact those have necessarily had. I mean, statistically, from what I'm seeing, we're at 43 casualties in the last week, which is an all-time high. So I don't know if EW is necessarily having that same effect, but we also have seen reports even from the Russians themselves admitting to losing Mavich drones. So I guess maybe, and I'm not a defense industry expert or defense technology expert, but we do have people on the panel that do have military experience and more sort of ideas or know-how about sort of how do we solve these problems? What could be effective methods of ramification here?
Right. Well, thanks for that. I mean, one note here, the authorities have to be very diplomatic. There is a lot of politics here, right? There is a military reality and there's political reality. And despite the war, politics are, as always, very complex. Prokudin might not be popular with pretty much every single resident in the city of Kherson, from what I can tell, or at least the latest decisions or the way the city authorities were unable to handle this catastrophe. And very recently, last week, there was a press conference, and Prokudin said that he is not responsible for the drone situation in the city and the region. And it is a very interesting statement, because he's in charge of the regional military administration. So on Monday, I'm doing an interview with one of his assistants, and I will try to figure out who is responsible. As for the electronic warfare that recently has been purchased, there's a lot of discussions. We haven't seen any results yet, let's put it this way. That is not to say that it's very difficult. I spoke to a lot of military, and pretty much everybody is saying that the major problem is the change in frequencies. And whenever they bring up the adequate defense, the Russians would change frequencies, and nobody has the device that would be able to act for the whole range. This is too expensive. They're not available here, and they couldn't be afforded. So there needs to be some other sort of solution. And again, I mean, I was looking online into something like even the anti-drone nets, but clearly it's not something that could be used for a city. The city couldn't be covered with a net, right? The other thing, you know, the natural defenses are wind, rain, and fog, and the trees and the leaves, the foliage. And Kherson is a very, very green city. There are parks, it's beautiful. There are sycamore trees, and but the leaves are falling, and they're falling very, very fast. And soon there will be no protection. And that's why we're talking about urgency here. So giving it back to you guys, what can be done?
Yeah, Andrew, Erlend, would either of you guys want to comment on sort of your experiences with tracking drones? Daniela as well, if you guys want to jump in and talk a little bit more about that sort of, we've discussed it before, but sort of the frequency battle, right? Like Zarina had mentioned. Could you guys expand upon that for the audience?
Well, maybe Daniela wants to give some comments. Andrew, I'll stay in the background, I guess, but
Yep.
I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I was battling as always with the microphone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
By the way,
yep.
I just want to say Daniela is one of our researchers, and he has been doing a lot of research on drones, both on the statistics part, but also studying a lot of the tactics used by both sides. So that's why Daniela is at the panel, just to make sure people know.
Thank you, Erlend. Thank you for your introduction. And honestly, I can't define myself as an expert, but at least I've seen a lot of activity, especially of FPV drone, most of the time on military. So for me, it was not completely new, but was quite frustrating to see all the work done on tracking what's going on in Kherson. And so one of the issues with the frequency, Zarina, you explained very, very well that the main problem that you will have when you start to use just EW system, because EW is always like an umbrella which works as much as you are using the correct technology for the correct threat that you are trying to defend against. And one of the other problem with the EW system is the range and the power that you need to deter many threats at the same time. So you're not going to cover the entire city unless you have a substantial increase in spending on this side. And even if you do so, doesn't mean that you have 100% security. But of course, is a step that needs to be done to add a layer of security. And in my perspective, one of the things that possibly in these cases would be potentially more reliable is the creation of a kind of a task force of other FPV drone and drone pilots who will try to hunt down these groups. And please, Andrew, intervene if I'm saying something silly, but I think one of the things that really deter FPV drone pilot to operate in a zone is the risk of being detected and then targeted by other FPV drone pilots or artillery, so mortar or traditional artillery. Now, I'm not aware of the current deployment in Kherson, of the capability on the ground, but I remember what Maider was doing in the region when there was the occupation of the other side of the river. Was a very precise and large number of strikes, even deep over the desertic area that you can find on the other bank of the Dnipro River, and those were very effective. So, in my opinion, probably the best solution in this case is not only a defensive posture, but also an offensive in order to try to push this group or completely away or much further deep into the occupied region in order to limit the amount of loitering time that they have on the civilian, and of course other protection, like I used to say, the foliage, increase the number of trees, but or nets, and also this device that you show, those are very valuable because can help. But when you have these are really lifesaver. I've seen many of them, and they are very good device. But and honestly, they even improved with the time. I remember one of the few that I saw at the very beginning wasn't able to give you the correct location in altitude. So this is new to me. So it's very nice improvement that I see. So, right. But all these are layers, and I think to completely eradicate the problem, the Ukrainian army have to have a more offensive posture, which doesn't mean physical operation on the other side, but trying to track these war criminal, because this is a war crime, and trying to deter them from doing this action. And I give way to Andrew, who has probably much more experience on that. Thank you, Zarina, for your wonderful work.
Thank you.
From what I understand, one of the bigger threats to EW is the artillery. And I think they're using the artillery to target those more important assets. So I think for Ukraine to take control of the situation here, I think what you would first have to do is invest in long-range reconnaissance, like a shark drones and stuff like that, and use those to identify the artillery pieces that are hitting the city. I think you would have to do like a focused campaign on eliminating those artillery pieces as much as possible. I don't think you ever could get rid of all of them, but you'd have to like really limit them. And then once those artillery pieces are pushed out away from the city, you could bring in more expensive EW assets that are more capable. And I think you'd have to bring in lots all at the same time so that Russia wouldn't have a chance to adapt by changing frequencies. And that would be very expensive, and it would take a dedicated campaign to take care of all those artillery pieces. And if it were to work, you would then run into the problem of probably a very big increase of airstrikes, I would imagine. Because then they would want to take out everything with airstrikes. So there's not really a winning thing here. It's like what's going on now might be the preferable outcome, but because like I don't like imagine if the city were getting hit with like 20, 30, 40, 50 bombs a day. Like it would probably be worse than what's going on now.
Yes. So, they actually tried to do it last September when I just came here to start working on this documentary. They started by dropping several, like 5, I forgot the numbers now, but there were several aerial gliding bombs a day, and there are craters right next to my building, and that was pretty horrible. They even used an Iskander at some point or two downtown, and that would very, very easily and fast erase and destroy the whole of Kherson. It's not that big. It's true, but this is also not a solution. There's got to be some solution. I'm going to keep banging on every door and keep asking and keep thinking. There's got to be some genius, apart from the obvious, where we get, I mean, the Ukrainian military, not we are an American journalist, but when the Ukrainian side gets the long range, high precision weapons, and they can wipe out these positions and push the Russians back away from the Dnipro, and then they won't be able to attack them with drones or with aerial gliding bombs.
Yeah, you'd need pushing back the artillery. I think you could do it if I think Ukraine could do it if they really wanted to. You could really invest in the recon. You could, like, if you really wanted to, you could bring in like the archers and things like that. And you could shoot Gimlers at them if you really needed to. And the drones themselves can, like FPV drones, can take out those artillery pieces. It's not as efficient, but you can. So I think they could do that, but it would force Russia to bomb more. And I think bombing more would kind of be like the worst case scenario. So it might just be that Ukraine doesn't like this might be like the least worst outcome. So I don't know. Like you'd need the air defense to stop them from bombing, and Ukraine just doesn't have that. Like you'd need like a long range missiles for aircraft with long range missiles and long range radars, and the F-16s can't do that. And I'm not really sure what plane like you could get that could do it. Maybe like the Gripen if you had the Meteor and the upgraded radars, but that's like not even like on the table right now. So I don't know. It's like I mean the bombing problem you have all over Ukraine, right? So like Kharkiv is getting bombed and like Vovchansk and like everywhere is getting bombed. So I don't know.
Yeah, but in terms of drones, Kherson has become a polygon for this new tactic, and that's how it's different. And yeah, let's not bring in the bombs. That's bad enough a problem to solve. And I did mention that for now, the most efficient device against the drones is actually a hunting rifle, which many people bring around, walking around, or just shoot from the windows when the drones appear, because they have pebbles and there's a pebble cloud and they take down the drone. So that obviously it's not the best, the most efficient modern solution. So but I see some really good questions in the chat, and maybe perhaps somebody's listening to us has some sort of expertise or spark of genius and would be able to help. I am on X, Twitter, on Facebook. You can easily find me, and please reach out. And I would like to discuss whatever way somebody can think of helping the city.
Yeah, we'll link the all your contact information in the description of the video, so people can find that. I guess we can go through some of the questions. So Eric says, you say Ukrainians have loved ones on the other side of the river. Are the Russians stopping them from crossing the river to the Ukrainian side? It's a very good question, actually.
It's a great question. And I think a lot of people don't understand well, fair enough, the geography here, which is very unique. And the way I like to explain is that, say, I'm from San Francisco, right? So for me, that would be Berkeley occupied by the Russians, and I'm still in San Francisco. So my sister is on the other side in Berkeley, and she's, her, well, not a village, but her town is seized by the enemy. And I'm on this side. And from that side of the bay, the Russians are pummeling me with drones and bombs. So you just take this analogy into any other city that has a river or some water body, right? In New York, it would be Manhattan and Brooklyn. Take it to London, the Thames, and so on and so forth, right? So you get the idea. So people lived here, they wouldn't think twice about being on the other side. Many had cottage houses on the other side, because the other side is a little bit more like resorty. There's beautiful nature here. People love fishing and mushroom and hunting and stuff like that. So when Russians came over during the first days of the invasion, they were here by the 1st of March, 2022, the whole area was occupied. But when the Russians retreated in 9 months on the 11th of November of 2023, they stopped there, and that's where they are now based. And many people I know here have their houses occupied by the Russians, and the Russians are living, the Russian military are living in their houses. Of course, they don't ask anybody whether they can or they cannot. They just come and take them. As for the people who are on the other side, it's very, very difficult to move. There's only one humanitarian corridor that used to operate from the Russian territory or the Russian occupied territory to Ukraine. That was actually in the Sumy region. And that's exactly where the Kursk incursion happened. I was in that corridor, and I saw people who would take this very long journey all the way from the river Dnipro on the other side, right on the occupied side, and throughout Ukraine, and arrive all the way through Russia and back to the corridor in Sumy. And I'm not going to go into details, but it was a very torturous process. I interviewed a lot of them. There are a lot of elderly people. There are a lot of people who are sick and who simply wouldn't make that journey. Because there are, for instance, 5 kilometers where there's no transportation allowed. They have to walk. And quite a few people died there during the summer heat and so forth. Also, it's expensive. The other way, people can come back to Ukraine is going all the way through Russia, through Crimea sometimes, or through Moscow, and then through Europe, through Poland, and back into Ukraine. And it's very expensive, and not everybody has the money. And it's the same problem as on the here on the right bank, where people have sustenance. They have their houses, and they have some kitchen garden and the food that they can have. But other than that, they don't have anything else, and therefore they can't move. And the other factor, which is important, is that, starting in November 2023, there were some advances of the Ukrainian army when they had this area, a village called Krinky, and other areas on the occupied left bank, where the Ukrainian army liberated those spots, these small areas. And so everybody here, at least, was expecting for the left bank to be liberated. People are very optimistic. So I hear that a lot of people on the other side are waiting for the Ukrainian army to come and liberate them. So it's not that simple.
Yeah, we have some friends who have family in Oleshki, and it's tragic to hear from them, because they are eternally optimistic of being liberated, but at the same time they're like, but when is it going to happen? It's like, it's been a long time, especially when the dam collapsed, and the situation there got like really awful. Like the town flooded, a lot of people drowned, and So yeah, it's really sad hearing from them.
Yeah, it's tragic. With the flood, the other side suffered tremendously, and I'm doing some investigation, but there's just a lot going on. And I've interviewed some people, and we don't have the full number. There could be tens of thousands who perished during the flood. So.
Wow, thank you for that response. Oh, sorry.
There's another good question that I see from a Space Test account, that the terror campaign is not getting much coverage, and how can people get the word out? Thank you for this question. I think this is very important. Obviously, being a journalist and fighting the information warfare, I believe in the power of information. And I do believe if the word gets out and it's a general knowledge, I do believe in the intrinsic goodness of the human nature, if you will, even after seeing everything that I've seen so far. And I believe that people of the world, not to become all elevated here, will try to do something. There are legal measures there. I actually, in fact, have a list of measures that I was scribbling down of what could be done, or there could be again a team of various experts who can put their thoughts together and decide what could be done. Sanctions again, whatnot. But first of all, it needs to be known, because it's very hard to get the word out. I started to scream about it literally in July, in the beginning of July, because in June I went to the Sumy region and I was reporting from the other area, and at that point the drones were not as problematic. And then I came back here and I couldn't believe what I've seen. And as I started to try and report it, my newspaper, I report for the Byline Times for the last 8 years. So, the editor trusts my reports. So we immediately ran a big article that, got some readership, people saw it. Then another newspaper I write for is Euromaidan Press. We ran a big research there. Okay, a few people saw it, but it's still not enough. And then I was talking to other publications I've been reporting for before as a freelance, like the BBC News, or I spoke to The Guardian, I spoke to PBS, I spoke to the Canadian radio, and generally the editors tend to treat this with disbelief, and if not to say denial, and I even spoke to psychologists, and they believe that this is a defense mechanism, because it's sort of like Holocaust or concentration camps. It's so inhumane that this could be perceived as sort of a threat to your own psyche, and it's easier to say, oh, this woman is just crazy, it's not happening, because nobody else is reporting it. The reason nobody else is reporting it is because it's very hard to get a permit and come here. And there was a question here in the chat. Somebody was asking, do I think it's worth coming to Kherson? Well, it's not that simple. You have to have an accreditation from the Ministry of Defense as a journalist, if you come in as a journalist. And on top of that, you have to get this very hard to obtain permit. And then it will only allow you to stay here for a week. I'm in a special situation because I'm making a documentary, writing a book, and I have established myself with the authorities here. They know who I am. But even still, I have to submit for a permit on a weekly basis. It's not like I'm just staying here. So now it started to get out. There's a big article in the Kyiv Independent, which made some rounds, and I see that there are some publications that are starting to follow up and run their reports based on that. There are several big shows that are supposed to be coming up this week. So what can be, I also did the other day, the TVP World, which is a Polish television in English. It's quite big. So first and foremost, we can share what already is out there. Secondly, we can invite journalists to interview people here, even if it's remote. I can provide materials just like I did with our friends here on the Tochnyi. I'm here to help in any way, shape, or form to facilitate the spread of word. But we just need to make to bring the awareness to the problem.
Yeah, thank you for.
Sorry, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Brendan.
Erlend. I was just going to say the same thing. I think. Thank you for addressing the question. Right? Is it advisable to have a visit in Kherson? Yeah. I think, like you had correctly explained there, I don't think a lot of people necessarily grasp the danger of the situation in Kherson Oblast generally, and the necessary precautions that you have to go through to get there. I know that's come up in my conversations with Jonathan Pierce from ATP Geopolitics as well, in terms of his. I think he's been to Kherson twice, and so his visits also he reflected upon that. Were there any other questions in the chat?
Well, there are, but I think you basically addressed them all. So unless there's something that we missed, I don't think so.
Yeah, if you saw anything in chat, Zarina, you wanted to address, otherwise,
no, I'm not Madonna. I'm a war journalist and a writer from California. So we address that. Trying to raise funds for sugar cubes and analyzers. Yes, if anybody wants to run a fundraiser for either military or civilians here, please let me know. I cannot do it. Journalists don't usually fundraise, but I can help with anybody who wants to fundraise. Ukrainian FPV drones and pilots are the best. I agree. I don't know about that. This is something from your conversation before.
yeah.
And there was something about the binoculars with thermal sensors. I mean, you can see them. You don't even need the binoculars. You hear them. You hear them very well. They buzz, and you do see them as they approach. I'm sure you can see them in the binoculars as well. And at night, you will need the thermal sensors because you won't see them because they fly without lights. And actually in the Sumy region, they have the FPV drones and small drones are mainly flying at night, which I was kind of surprised. It was kind of curious detail because it was the other way around. There they fly at night, and here they fly during the day and not at night. At night we have Shahid drones that pass right by my roof, and sometimes I would leisurely step out on my balcony and just record the sound of a Shahid and the Kalashnikov shooting them down. That's very romantic.
Thank you for addressing all the questions in chat, and thank you for taking this opportunity to shed light, firsthand experience on this issue to our audience. We're very, very much concerned about this issue and continuing to follow up on it with our audience as this continues to develop. I'm in the works of a third installment on my end in terms of research and writing as well. So thank you so much, Zarina, for taking time out of your day, and also I know the situation there is dangerous, and you have drones right near you. So thank you. Can't say that enough, and I can't stress that enough. And for anybody that's in the audience, if you do not follow Zarina on X, or follow her on Medium or any of her work with Euromaidan Press or Byline Times, you definitely should. Just in terms of general knowledge about disinformation and everything, some of her reporting is some of the best out there, and I've personally read it myself. So please support Zarina in her mission, and thank you.
And I just wanted to thank you guys, every single one on the panel, for Andrew, Brandon, Erlend, Danielle. am I missing anyone? I think and everybody in the audience, thank you so much for addressing that. Very few do, and you recognize the gravity of the issue, and you do brilliant research. And I just can't thank you enough. That means a lot to the people of Kherson and to me personally at this point, because I got to really love this city, and I'm very concerned about the people here. And thank you very much. There's the last question, which is a very, very good question. The stats on casualties from this FPV versus civilians. Yes, very briefly, it's September, there were 140 casualties, 10 of them fatalities, and this is reported by the military administration. There are other numbers that I quote in my the Kyiv Independent article, Human Safari, and there are more that I quote every day. I try to run the report every day on the casualties on my X Twitter feed.
Yeah, Zarina does an excellent job doing daily casualty updates, and accompanied that with photographic evidence, interviews from the strike usually as well. Yeah, and I think I did a count this morning up to the 4th, and I'm at 348 killed and wounded. And I know a woman who was wounded on the 22nd, a man who was wounded on the 22nd just recently passed away as well. Yeah.
A lot of people don't come to the doctors or to the hospital and try to treat themselves. A lot of them can't make it to the hospital because there are no cars. And so we just don't know the exact toll. But yeah, I'm going to stop myself because obviously I'm very invested into the subject, and I don't want, we dedicated a lot of time for that. So I'm very grateful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Zarina.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Zarina.
Yes. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.